very happy to bring Skinny Beef aboard this podcast as a new sponsor. If you go to www.skinnybeef.com, use coupon code ALEX10, you can buy all of your beef over there. It is 98% lean, so obviously you can save a lot on your dietary fats. So this is mainly going to be the beef for contest prep individuals, so you can still get the amino acid profile of beef without having all that extra fat in there, and so you can either save your fat for other places, place them at other periods of the day, or whatever you actually need to do. Again, check out Skinny Beef at skinnybeef.com, coupon code ALEX10. Thank you guys so much at Skinny Beef. Thank you for having me aboard. What's up, everyone? Online Prep Coach Alex here with prepcoach.com, back with another new guide. This is the chemical signaling guide, so everyone can actually understand a little bit more about how to apply their actual PEDs, specifically androgens. So this topic is trying to stick more for the people who are trying to understand how to apply their athletic HRT, how they're trying to apply blasting and cruising, all based on body weights, needs, and how to actually change that as you're going throughout your cycle. The worst thing that you can do, which a lot of people do all the time, is they have their cruising, which everyone's usually 200 milligrams of testosterone. That is their cruising dosage. And then they go straight to their peak blasting dosage, and they go straight up to 1 gram or 2 grams, and they just stay there forever. In reality, that's not how chemical signaling works. So the way these androgens go ahead and how all of these actual anabolics actually work is at that nuclear transmission based level, so that interaction with the cell's nucleus, it tells us what to do. So it tells our body to express protein, to retain glycogen, to retain fluid, to flux ions, to do all of these different things neurologically, myologically. The list literally goes on and on and on. That's why each drug offers something differently. We look at the testosterone category, and obviously those are more broad spectrum. We look at the DHT category, those are a little bit more specific, and we look over at the 19-nor, and those are a little bit more specific than the testosterones, but still a little bit more broad spectrum. They will all drive essentially the same amount of anabolism over time in terms of protein expression, but it's going to change based on the person. So what do you need? If you're someone who just needs protein expression and no need for more volume, no need for more red blood cell count, no need for whatever, then okay, maybe we just need a DHT. Or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you're the person who just can't get the same training adaptations that you need, so we need to apply something like a 19-nor for a little bit more volume, a little more changes and leverages, a little bit more strength in the gym to equate to more muscle tissue over time. So even though every anabolic was going to basically express the same amount of protein, again, not talking about trenbolone, DHB, trestolone, things like that, but the common ones we're usually talking about is the ones we're going to be talking about in this actual guide. And remember, even though they do express the same amount of protein, they build, quote unquote, the same amount of muscle tissue, they're not going to have the same genomic changes. And those genomic changes and different changes in the kinetics and metabolism of those drugs is what makes them better or worse for certain people. That's why certain people say, man, I grow so well on DECA, or I grow so well on Primobolan, or I grow so well on this, that, or the other. It's because that drug is fitting in all the gaps that they have. So to begin, we first look at, okay, what drugs do we need? Or rather, we ask ourselves, what characteristics are we missing? What do we need from the drugs? Look over the drugs and see which drugs fit that actual bill. Go ahead and apply them. That gives us our athletic HRT, which we will put at 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. I always have to give credit where credit's due. That term comes from Broderick Chavez, one of my best friends on this world, and he did come up with the term athletic HRT, which is set at 3 milligrams per kilogram, which I absolutely love. To me, if you're an athlete, that's where you're essentially going to hang out year round, and then you transition to a blast, which should be right about 5 milligrams per kilogram, and then we escalate from there. So if we look, I have a couple different graphics that I actually have up on my screen that I want to make sure you guys see. We have one, which is the timeline for androgens, and then two, which is the chemical signaling assessment. We're going to start with the chemical signaling assessment. So we look at actually our check-in progress pictures. We look at our weight, look at our autonomics, we look at our performance. From there, for our weekly check-ins, we ask ourselves, did we make progress? If we did, we don't need to change anything. We give that a week, we go back and we ask ourselves the same questions. You do that all the way until you look at your progress and you say, no, I didn't make enough progress or something was wrong. So then we have to assess what was wrong. Was there a training problem? Was there an issue with life? Was there an issue with food? Was there an issue with just needing more sheer drug need? Because at some point, that's going to be an equation. If we're in a caloric surplus or caloric deficit, that's going to change how our body actually metabolizes these drugs. That's going to change the entire cleaving, hydrolysis, and accumulation process. So we need to kind of figure out, okay, what do we need? If it is a chemical signaling problem, which again, I'm basing this entire guide off of, let's say it's a chemical signaling problem, food is fine, life is fine, training's fine, but for whatever reason, we didn't lose enough fat, we didn't build enough muscle tissue, we aren't recovering enough, whatever, something's going on there, we just need more sheer drug on the anabolic side of things, then we need to go through and we need to actually see what's going wrong. Is it the compound itself? We just need more action out of our current drug, which means we just need more of an increase in milligrams because we need more of a chemical signal. Or is it a lacking of a secondary cascade? So does that mean that we need to fix this from a different complementary aspect and fix the problem with polypharmacy? What that would look like is, let's just say we do this check-in, we see, okay, it's a compound expression-based issue. So we have, let's just say, testosterone and prenatal, super easy cycle. Let's say that it is just a pure sheer action on protein expression, and we just need more to accommodate the food we're eating and the actual training that we have. Okay, cool, we're going to tick up prenatal. Whereas if we go and we look and we see, okay, it's not the prenatal, it's not the testosterone, maybe there's an issue with thyroid. Maybe there's an issue with something else. Then, ooh, okay, now we need to tackle that and fix it via polypharmacy and bring in another compound now to complement what the problem is wrong. So, if you understand that basic chemical signaling assessment, we're going to go over back and go to the timeline for androgens. Now, in this scenario, we are basically looking at a hypothetical male who is going from 3 milligrams per kilogram of athletic cruising and transitioning into a blast. Last time he took this course, he gained, we'll say, 10 pounds of muscle tissue, lean contractile tissue, let's just say a couple pounds of fluid, and he was very happy with how he ended, and he ended at 8 milligrams per kilogram. So hypothetically, our ending dosage should escalate because he's now a larger individual and potentially needs more. Now we're looking at potentially ending this next cycle at 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight on this blast. Now the problem is, this is the problem that everyone makes. They see that they took 8 milligrams per kilogram before, they automatically start at 9 regardless. Remember what I said about how drug metabolism changes based on the environment, literally based at the hepatocyte level. Look at what's going on with phase 1, phase 2 digestion. Look at what's going on with the actual cleaving hydrolysis process, accumulation in our bloodstream. Everything as a whole is different. Whether we have more muscle tissue, whether we have less body fat, whether our life is in a better situation, whether we're getting more sleep, maybe we have a better handle on managing our circadian rhythms. The list goes on, but because of that, all of a sudden now, ooh, maybe we don't need as many drugs because we're in a better position because training has improved, nutrition has improved. Maybe before we weren't getting our basic vitamin needs, we weren't getting our basic mineral needs. Now all of a sudden we corrected that with some zinc, some copper, some whatever we needed. That's why we can't just go straight to the end dosage, because every cycle does not need to be more than the last, because every cycle is different. It's just like every prep. Every prep is different. Every off season is different because you're a different person. You're a different biological creature every day to day, week to week, month to month. So we do all of this off of autoregulation, off of biofeedback. So we take the feedback that our body's giving us via progress pictures, via autonomics, via all of those things, our training notes and all that good stuff, and we use that to make our deciding factor. So week 1, we go from 3 milligrams up straight to 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. That's usually the initial threshold dosage a lot of people need. You could probably get away with going from 3 to 4, or 3 to 4 and then 4 to 5 in the first initial weeks. But for most people, again, because this is a very generalized timeline for how to approach this, let's just say we're going straight from 3 to 5. That's not a massive jump. For certain people it is, but let's just keep it simple. So we have that. Now we have to understand a little bit about esters. So I want to make sure you guys completely understand this. If we look at what an ester is, it's just a carbon-hydrogen chain that's chemically bound to a parent molecule, and it's basically there to alter its water solubility. So with androgens, you're looking at that release from the actual injection site that lowers the water solubility while increasing its fat solubility. So that forms depot in the muscle tissue, so it can slowly actually enter into circulation. This is that esterification process, temporarily deactivates the steroid molecule, and then before it can become active again, the ester actually has to be removed. So that happens once the drug is basically filtered through into the bloodstream, restores the hydroxyl group at that 17th beta position. This is where we look into longer and shorter esters. For our conversation, we are looking at longer esters because, again, if we understand longer esters, and I will do the quick math for you, even though I have an entire video out on this, it's going to accumulate in greater peak plasma concentration blood values. So we're essentially getting more bang for our buck out of the same dosage. So if we have the long ester versus the short ester, let's say we're applying 300 milligrams per week. Day 0, that's 300, decays down to 150, which decays down to 75, which decays down to 37.5. Remember, we are applying this 1 time per week for a long ester. So we go from 300 milligrams at day 0 to day 7 at 150 plus a second application. And then day 14, that 150 now decayed down to 175, that 300 decayed down to 150, but now we have another 300 coming in. You understand where I'm going with that. That accumulates up into having a greater number than the shorter ester, because if we look at the shorter ester, remember, 300 milligrams total per week, but now it's split up into 3 weekly dosages. Day 0 is 100, day 2 is 50, day 4 is 25, day 6 is 12.5, and go back, day 2, now we added another 100 milligrams. Go over to day 4, now we have the 25 decayed from 50, we have the 100 decayed down to 50, and then, or the 25 decayed from the 50, then the 100 decayed down to the 50, and we add another 100 milligrams. Essentially, you do out that math, and the longer ester accumulates in a greater total number. It's literally math, and just so you guys know, I am terrible at math. I got terrible grades in it in school. I absolutely hate math. I have no desire to do math, but even I can do that simple math to figure out, ooh, okay, long esters equate to greater everything, which also means greater side effects. But if you're applying the same dosage, you're getting greater beneficial effects as well. So there is a reason and time and a place to use short esters. I'm not trying to demonize anything, but the reality of the situation is if you're a fitness-based athlete and you're partaking in something that doesn't require you to beat drugs, we're almost always sticking to long esters. We can get complicated and complex and use short esters and peak things in a little bit better ways. But again, that's a little out of the scope of this video, and I do it for maybe 30% of individuals that can actually benefit from that. But I want to keep this very brief and very kind of focused. So let's not worry about that. Let's stick to the long esters. So we introduced that 3 to 5 escalation, so 3 milligrams up to the 5 milligrams per kilogram in week 1. We have weeks 2 through 4, we're essentially letting that long esters cleave, hydrolyze, accumulate, and peak in the bloodstream. So right around, and remember, during this time, we have things that need to come up online in our system. So all of our aerobic-based systems, all of our ribosomes, our mitochondria, all of those cellular interactions are starting at such a low level, which now have been peaked. So if we have our androgen receptors being so highly upregulated now, all of those subsystems now have to meet the demands of that new drug requirement. So imagine like, you got your new car, you souped it up, but you got to take it back into the shop. Basically, our body's still in the shop for the first 4-ish weeks. We'll say 4 to 6 weeks. So it's in the shop. Our body is, bringing up all of these subsystems now to accommodate that new drug load. Right at about that 5th-ish week, that's whenever our body says, ooh, okay, cool. Everything from our mitochondrial capacity, everything including our ribosomal and enzymatic interactions. The enzyme portion is actually the most important in my opinion, but you could debate that till the end of time. But either way, all of these subsystems are now up online, and now we can actually really start doing the growing. So up until that point, a lot of the cellular-based crap wasn't really fully online. What that does not mean is that you're not growing until week 5. You are growing from the moment you inject that drug into your bloodstream. So it's slowly accumulating, it's peaked, and now cool. From here, any additional addition that you're making from a chemical aspect, if you add another milligram per kilogram or another 2 milligrams per kilogram, it's happening immediately because those subsystems are already online and able to handle everything because the drug has accumulated and peaked. So we have week 5. We look at everything. We do our check-ins and we see, okay, do we need to adjust our nutrition, our training, our lifestyle, recovery? Or do we go back to that actual chemical assessment graphic that I made for you guys and we go through that entire process? What was wrong? Was it the chemical signaling? Was it the life? If it was chemical signaling, was it the compound expression? Was it the lacking of a secondary cascade? We go through that entire thing and we make the changes, okay? So usually that change, let's just say it's from a chemical side. This entire thing is going to hinge on the fact that it's always going to be a chemical problem. That's not always the case. But let's just say, we'll go through 2 examples. First, we'll go through the chemical problem. So at week 5, we have a chemical issue. We fix that. Usually we can get by another week or 2 on the anabolic androgenic side of things before we need to make another adjustment to those. Notice I said that. And that's not talking about insulin. That's not talking about growth hormone. That's not talking about thyroid. That is specifically for androgen. So we get away with a couple weeks, need to reassess again, get away with a couple weeks, reassess again, get away with a couple weeks, reassess again, and so on and so forth. And we do that until we get to the 15 to 20 week range, which is where we end because systemic fatigue does do its thing, it does accumulate, and that's why we auto-regulate so heavy, especially during those final weeks. With most people, I will only do a 15-week approach because it's very much easier to accommodate and adjust and even program for, at least for me, because I have that 16th week actually being a specific deload, a transitional deload week. But either way, That's what would happen if it's purely the chemical issue every single time, which does happen. Let's say it's not. Let's say we go back, different person, and now it's a different issue. So we did our additional, or our initial rather, increase from 3 to 5 milligrams per kilogram, escalated, we're good week 5, and now let's say, you know what, we are in the off season and we just, we need a little more calories. There's something wrong, we're not having enough energy, our training is perfect, our pharmacology is perfect, and we just can't express enough protein because there's not enough energy. Not only that, but when we look at amino acids and understand protein intake, distribution, and all that fun stuff, it's all talking about time spent above that peak, above that curve, needs to be there. We need to have time above that because remember, we're synthesizing micrograms of contractile tissue per day. That's a very small amount, but over time, that accumulates and becomes, a couple pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds a year if you're a guy. If you're a female, maybe 3 to 7, 3 to 8, depending. So if it's a nutritional problem at week 5, we add in nutrition, then we go to week 6. Now this time, okay, we didn't change the chemical signaling aspect, so okay, maybe now we do need to adjust the chemical signaling aspect. And then we go to week 7. If we just made that chemical change, then now we don't need it because we just already did that, so maybe now it's a training nutritional aspect. And you go through repeating this process, and essentially with these anabolics, with these androgens, we're looking at assessing it at a 2-week increment and making the other changes in between, or not even making those changes based on the actual need. I hope that makes sense. It's somewhat confusing. It's very dynamic, and this is not a set in stone way to do these things. That's why this is such a dynamic process as a whole, because so much of it is dependent on the person, the problem, and why they didn't make the progress that week that they wanted to see. A lot of people say we hit a plateau, we did this, we did that. That's usually not it. It's just the fact that, okay, we pushed our body to such an extent, we now need to compensate and accommodate for that, or life happened. So this is a very brief chemical signaling timeline for androgens and how we assess chemical signaling assessments on a week-to-week basis. Remember, it's not always about escalating dosages from our initial athletic HRT to our hypothetical ending dosage. It's about transitioning from athletic HRT to our initial blasting dose to then going from that dosage and slowly working it up on an as-needed basis. In this hypothetical scenario, if nutrition was poor in the past and training was poor in the past, now all of a sudden they're better than ever, this person may only work up to 7 milligrams per kilogram, and they can be a lot bigger, have lost a lot more body fat, and had a lot more progress on this actual cycle because the other vectors were actually covered. That is one of the most important things that I want to relay on this actual podcast, on this guide. I want you guys to understand this completely. So I hope that makes a lot of sense. This is a very brief overview on chemical signaling and how I prefer to assess it. Remember, you can do this a ton of different ways. This is just one very quick and easy example on the timeline and how to assess yourself at a chemical level and need from a week-to-week basis. Now, what we didn't talk about was other things like our training, which does all have to be paired together. That can be, and this is where we get into kind of another conversation, because when we have, let's say, a higher intensity, higher rest period scenario, we're working more on that alactic aerobic side of things, which is causing more myotrauma, which we're going to need more expression from androgens, which, okay, makes sense, but now we go over to the volume side of things. If intensity is slightly lower, but rest periods are slightly lower as well, then we're working more on that glycolytic lactate side of things, which is more enzymatic mitochondrial. We're dealing more with homeostatic-based change with pH and temperature changes, causing basically nuclear transmission disruptions. That's where we're looking more at the peptide side of things, and instead of the expressive, now we're looking more at the nuclear side of things. But both of these are ending up being structural, cellular, myofilament-based changes, which just means they're all accumulating more lean contractile muscle tissue over time through different pathways, different needs. So you have to take that into consideration as well, because this guide was based just off of androgens. We also have the peptide category to remember, and we also then have the actual training and nutrition aspect to take into consideration. A lot of this is very, I don't want to say complex and hard to do, but it's just something you have to have experience with, number one, and be very diligent with. I spend so much time with all of my athletes taking notes in the background, looking where we're at now, what we did before, where we want to go, and where I want them at next week. So that timeline is extremely important. If you're not doing that yourself as a coach for your clients, you're doing something wrong. You need to know where you've been, where you're at, and where you want to go. if you are working with someone and they're not doing that, then they're probably doing you a disservice. And I'm not saying that to talk down on anyone, but it just kind of makes sense. That's what periodization means. It's just planning. If you don't plan properly, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. It's the same thing here. I know I threw a lot at you in only 20 minutes. I hope you guys understood that. There's a lot to talk about here, and I did try to give my best synopsis on the entire topic, but it is something that I could spend hours and hours talking about. And I'm thinking about maybe doing a chemical signaling or some kind of a training in PED course and doing the live seminar thing just like I did with the actual peaking. I may do that if I get a lot of good feedback on that. I might kind of, I might try and work putting together a little guide so I can actually do that, because I could just get on and start talking about it now, but I think people would prefer to have a guide so it's a little bit easier to follow along after the fact, because I do tend to talk fairly fast and put out a lot of information in a very short period of time. So I don't want to lose anyone. But either way, I'm sure you guys are going to have to re-listen to this a couple times, take notes, and more importantly, you're going to need experience. Experience is going to be the biggest and most important thing here. As always, thank you guys so much for listening. Check out prepcoach.com. See you guys next time.